Before we begin, thank you very much to Lord Frieza, punishing Captain Ginyu for joining TJOmega's Patreon, for joining the Patreon campaign. I'm gonna start an entire Dragon Ball Z narrative in these shoutouts. Captain Ginyu joined up, Lord Frieza now punishing him, so apparently Lord Frieza, not a Transformer fan, which doesn't really surprise me, all things considered. But thank you very much for the contribution. Thank you for the fun shout out. It's always appreciated. So, speaking of, we are very, very close. I'll give you a quick reminder that we are very, very close to 50,000 subscribers here on the channel. Long overdue, but it is about to happen. Remember, it is a very big giveaway that I am doing at 50,000. So if you want in on it, if you want it to happen, and you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button. It's free and it helps out the channel a lot. So anyone who does so, I genuinely appreciate it. And yes, hit the bell so you can actually find out when the new videos go live. So, with a little speaking of the Patreon campaign, this is a Patreon request. So, someone asked me, what would it be like if the dead Maximals and Predacons from Beast Wars were in Beast Machines? Now, I'm going to modify this a little bit because, to be honest here, I've already rewritten all of Beast Machines once before. I'm very proud of how it came out. I'm probably not going to revisit it again. So instead, we're going to modify this. Rather than trying to figure out where a dozen extra characters go into Beast Machines, which is way too many moving parts to get out and figure out in the whole narrative, we're going to take this a character at a time, either through Megatron machinations with time or the Oracle granting Optimus Primal a boon from the Allspark. Let's just say that one or two characters are able to come back in the fiction, and we're going to examine how each one of them would kind of fall into things in Beast Machines, and which ones would benefit the most and which ones would tell the most interesting stories. So, to begin with, there's a few on the list from Beast Wars that we don't really have to think about all that hard. Let's be honest, not everyone in that show is incredibly in-depth, right? So a few of them are pretty easy to pick out. For instance, Quickstrike. Gee, I wonder what you do with Quickstrike. He is a character who would be brought back simply as gun fodder, or just a handy spark to power a Viacon. The thing is, with Quickstrike, there is no ambiguity to it. He likes fighting Maximals, and while he has had traitorous streaks, it's mostly when someone has been there to talk him into it. Ultimately, he will fall in line with Megatron, especially since Megatron's presence on Cybertron and Beast Machines is literally overwhelming. There is no chance for betrayal here. So for Quickstrike, the chance to not only beat up some Maximals again, but also get a bigger, more powerful body in the process by becoming a Viacon, I think he'd be thrilled with the prospect. So on him, we don't really have to think about all that much. And there's others in a similar boat. So for instance, Scorponok. You would think this one would be a no-brainer. He is naturally loyal to Megatron. He falls in with the Viacons, etc. However, if we're talking about any of Megatron's previous cohorts, I think, among all of them, the one he would bring back the most, the one he would want back the most in this situation is Scorponok. Because let's remember, number one, it's the only one who chooses to be fiercely loyal. You know, it's not a flaw in his logic circuits or anything like that. It's not enforced like it is on Rampage or something. No. Scorponok is the only one who's 100% loyal to Megatron entirely by choice. So that's already a number one. But Scorponok's specialty is viruses and bioweapons. And when we're talking Maximals who are biological and who are trying to bring biology back to the planet of Cybertron, having someone whose skill set is destroying and poisoning biologicals is ideal. Scorponok would be invaluable to Megatron to bring him back into the fold, to the point where he may not even remake him into a Viacon. He might be his best suited self as is. Just throw him into a protoform and let him just come back as he was. But it is a really handy thing. He would actually, tip the power balance a little bit, oddly enough. It's weird to think that Scorponok would be way more effective in beast machines, but I think it's true. Another one on the list of easy ones to pick out is Airazor. There's just no question here, right? She falls in with the Maximals, and, aside from just loyalty to Primal, the thing is with her, she doesn't really have, she has strong moments in Beast Wars, but because she comes later in Season 1 and abruptly gets written out of Season 2, she really doesn't have a whole lot going on. She's pretty much put on the side bench for most of Beast Wars, showing up when the script really needs a flyer, or when, Tigatron needs someone to go hunting with. So really, it's hard to figure out what she would do if she were the one brought back. The only way you make it interesting is if she is a package deal with Tigatron. And this is an easy one to explain, considering the last time we saw them, they were a binary spark. So similar to how the BotCon comics kind of use that same logic to separate them out into two beings again for their transmetal forms, this could apply the same way. We could get both of them back by bringing back a single spark. And here's the fun part. Tigatron would be all about this. Remember, he's so at home at nature, And the idea of bringing nature to Cybertron would be his thing. More so than any of the other Maximals, I feel. When you take a look at, the zealot aspect of Optimus Primal, this huge spiritual devotion to the Oracle's goal of bringing organics back to Cybertron. I feel like Tigatron would bring that in. In Beast Machines, Tigatron would be the main disciple of Primal in this case, or just take that zealot nature that Primal took onto himself. So he would be the one who's super on board with the Oracle's project. And that's where you kind of get something with Airazor, where there might be tension in their relationship because this is kind of clashing, because he's going too far, etc. There you create interesting narrative for Airazor, and by going the natural direction for Tigatron. Again, I'm already on this list. I've already found two characters who feel like they'd be more at home at Beast Machines. It's weird. How about another pair that we have to bring back at the same time? And we'll start, obviously, with Depth Charge. So, we're talking Rampage next. I feel okay, so the Universe comic books did actually bring back Depth Charge, because, of course, the toy came back in Universe. So, in that depiction, he wasn't happy about being brought back. And the way he went out, taking out Protoform X along with himself, I think he was perfectly happy, because that really did become the crux of his existence, was taking out Rampage. So once that was accomplished, it's hard to find something to live for after that. He is a character driven on vengeance, and what do you do when your vengeance has been obtained? It would be hard to control him, obviously, because it's always hard to control Depth Charge, to get him to fall in line. Even with millions of Viacons roaming the planet, I feel like he'd still try to strike it out on his own, and still try to be a rogue agent in the whole mix. But then if you brought back Rampage at the same time, you reignite their feud as well. Now, that's kind of going back to the old standard of what they were doing before. In this case, Rampage is insane. Rampage's insanity would probably override whatever kind of logic would tell him, hey, this, Megatron controls an entire army. Maybe you don't shake that tree. Maybe you don't go there. So he would be very hard to predict. I feel like he really just would be just like a savage on Cybertron. If he was brought back, I don't think he'd take a side. I think he'd just be just like an engine of destruction, because, we don't know if, for instance, his spark would still be immortal, or if Megatron could pull the same stunt to control him. We don't know those factors. We don't know what would happen if you stick an immortal spark into a Viacon. So who knows? He is a big what if. He's a huge what if. I feel like if both characters came back, neither one would stick to their respective sides. They would just hunt and battle each other for eternity on Cybertron. I mean, it's just how those two are. There's no changing that. How about Terrasaur? Terrasaur is a weird one. What do you do with a treacherous character? What do you do with a character whose whole shtick is less successful Starscream? What do you do with a Starscream type whose goal to overthrow is literally in control of the entire planet? What do you do with that? You like, Megatron's already the ruler of everything. There's nothing Terrasaur could ever hope to do. With how much fear, because like Terrasaur is kept in line through fear. Like Starscream, he's ultimately a coward who's going to cave the second this situation just seems too difficult for him to handle. As soon as he's in over his head, he's out. He's in over his head as soon as he comes back on the line. Almost to the point where I almost feel like he might go in with the Maximals simply out of survival instinct. I think at this point, Megatron might be even more overwhelming for Terrasaur, and he might just try to find natural allies or just a safe haven at that point. He is a difficult one. Like, character-wise, I feel like he would have still had a place in, like, Season 2 of Beast Wars, and that's a what-if to explore as well. But where in Beast Machines? Because his usual stick doesn't apply. And I don't really think, ultimately, you could write some weird story to explain it, but ultimately he doesn't fit in with the Maximals either. He's a very difficult one. Ultimately, I don't feel like he fits the fiction at all. There's just really no room for it. Unless he's making, super devious and working everything from the inside, but that's also not Terrasaur. He's kind of an idiot. Yeah, Terrasaur is probably the most difficult one to figure out in all of this. There are others that do present interesting story possibilities that we have not touched on yet and do go in different directions. For instance, Tarantulas. Tarantulas' goal, regardless of who brought him back, is going to be to seek out the Tripredix Council or whatever is left of them. Now, keep in mind, Tripredix Council was stationed above Cybertron in orbit, their own little space station observing from on high. So they would have ample warning that something is happening down on the planet of Cybertron, and they'd be able to get out or they'd be able to hide themselves, one or the other. I would suspect they would hide themselves, call it cloaking device, hide behind the moon or whatever. But I feel like the Tripredix Council is smart enough to actually have a contingency plan just in case everything on Cybertron goes wrong, we need out. I feel like they would still exist somewhere, but laying super low. But that's Tarantulas. That's who he would have to work, and here's the thing. Even if he just becomes a Viacon, even if his spark is just grabbed and dropped into a Viacon drone, I still feel like the Tripredix Council would reactivate him on their own. To either seek him out as a Viacon general and reactivate his natural spark and memories, just to get their agent back and involved in what Megatron is doing to see if there is a way of taking over from the inside. The only option for Terrasaur would be is actually the option that Tarantulas could actually execute. How successful that would be is another story, but likewise, I think Tarantulas would be the key to actually fixing a plot hole in Beast Machines, which is what happened to the Tripredix Council. You have that option. That same option falls to Ravage. On the one hand, purely mechanical Cybertron, Ravage might be entirely on board for this, considering he's an old school Decepticon. At the same time, though, here's the thing. While I still think that reconnecting to the Tripredacus Council would be an important factor to him, I feel like the character, on his own, actually is, tries to work a balance. He is willing to work with a maximal side if it suits his own needs or meets the orders that he has. So, in this case, what Megatron is doing to Cybertron is not what G1 Megatron envisioned. He wanted planetary conquest, yes, but at no point did he try to imprison all of Cybertron, Autobot, Decepticon, Maximal, and Predacon alike, and be just like the sole ruler of essentially a dead world. That's not what Megatron ever envisioned, because that's more achievable than what Megatron was going for. No, I think this defies the original Megatron's vision enough that he might actually side with the Maximals on this one. Megatron might try to bring him back as an agent for himself, a super efficient agent, ultimately for him to just end up with the Maximals because, this is not what Megatron envisioned. After the fact, things get a little bit weird. Things would get a little bit weird. But for the moment, I think that finds a natural ally. And then, of course, whatever machinations he can derive from whatever Tripredacus Council still exists, that goes on as well. He'd actually be a really interesting double, triple agent type character if you worked him back in well enough. It'd take a very careful hand, though. Another interesting one that you think would be just a complete write-off, Inferno. Inferno, you would think, okay, fiercely loyal, he's a Viacon, right? Well, keep in mind, the only reason he was fiercely loyal is because he had a flaw in his logic circuits when he was brought online. He thought he was an ant. The instincts of the ant that he scanned went into his actual logic circuits. That's why he was so fiercely loyal to Megatron. So now you have a choice. Like, do you keep his original characterization irregardless of actual logic? Or do you try to actually adapt his original characterization? Because the original characterization, yeah, he's just going to be a Viacon. But it gets more interesting if you give him a fresh body whose logic circuits are completely clear and free of any kind of corruption from the ant. Especially if it's, a Maximal bringing him back and he gets reformatted, then his logic circuits are going to be completely clean. He would still be a berserker, he'd still be insane, but he also might view Cybertron as the ultimate colony. So at that point, it's an idea of, well, Megatron is kind of literally a queen ant at this point. He functions like one, but at the same time, he is going against what the planet itself wants. So now, where do you put Inferno? Wild card, right? Inferno's a complete wild card. You could flip him either direction, Maximal or Predacon. But either way, he's still going to be a psychopath. So we have to keep that in mind. Okay. Let's get the big one done. Let's get the big one out of the way. What do you do with Dinobot? I mean, while I would love to hear some more banter between Rat Trap and Dinobot, especially Rat Trap maturing so much during the course of Beast Machines, that could potentially bring about a lot of different changes to their dynamic. But ultimately, I feel like he would just feel scorned. Dinobot is a warrior of honor. To die in battle brings great honor to a warrior like him. And to do it in the way he did, self-sacrificing for the fate of an entire race, for the fate of two races, technically. To preserve the timeline, to save two worlds. He gave the ultimate sacrifice to save literally billions. It's an enormous sacrifice done for the right reasons, and it concludes the story. It concludes his entire arc and growth. I feel like bringing him back to life would just hurt him. Not character-wise. Character-wise, yes, it would hurt him to just bring him back. But The character himself, I do not think would accept it. I think he, among all of them, is most comfortable with how he went out and is proud of how he went out. I think he would feel like his honor was stripped away from him if he was brought back. So much as I would love to see Dinobot again, and he would be a very different character in Beast Machines. You know, he'd be kind of that lost Ronin type, just kind of not really fitting in anywhere. Not really, you know, because there's no Predacons left. You know, the Maximals, you know, kind of took away the honor he had. It'd be difficult, you know, and then the story between him and Rat Trap doesn't become the bickering and the rivalry. It becomes, you know, Rat Trap just really hurt that Dinobot is not who he used to be anymore. In the same way the Black Arachne was hurt by Silverbolt. You know, so that presents an incredibly different character. And speaking of, we do have one last character to talk about. I know it's going to be a long video, but hey, they've all been long lately. Thank you for watching this far. But there is one more fatality in Beast Wars that we do have to discuss because it might be the most interesting. What if it's Transmutate? So we know Transmutate is an incredibly powerful spark trapped in a body that is very, very damaged and from the get-go. So what happens if Transmutate is brought back? This, as I mentioned wild card before, this is the wild card. I think by nature Transmutate is ultimately good, so most likely they would end up with the Maximals, especially because Silverbolt is around. Remember, if we're doing these one at a time, there is no Rampage. There's no Rampage if Transmutate is the one that's resurrected, but there is a Silverbolt, and that bringing Transmutate back into the fold and with Silverbolt, that might have actually shaken Silverbolt's resolve a lot sooner than he was in the show. It might have brought him back to who he used to be, and then you have something a little more interesting between, and then you have something more interesting for Silverbolt and Black Arachne to do when Transmutate is suddenly in the picture. If you want to love triangle that, you could love triangle that, but essentially, aside from just being a very powerful spark and ultimately good-natured, there's really just a blank slate with Transmutate. You don't even keep that name. You know that it's the same person, but it is a completely fresh character, and, given how they were depicted afterwards, most likely a female character. So that's your true wild card, because that's basically a blank slate you can do whatever you want with, but there are interesting story beats even then. So there you go. Just a quick rundown of how these little bricks would fall into place if certain characters were brought back. Like I said, to bring back everyone would just be so overwhelming and so overcomplicated. I can't even begin to imagine the story it would take in order to make sense of the whole thing. But there you go. That is how it works for now. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Thankfully, the list of dead in Beast Wars is short, so I don't think I missed anybody. And for those who hadn't seen it, if you want a really good retelling of Beast Machines and the story that actually makes sense, I did make a video for it previously, so please search the channel for that one. If you have not seen it, I'm proud of how it came out. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.
We parlay with the captain.
You think a werecroc is going to listen to elvish rules of piracy?
Of course it would be the freaking elves that invented parlay.
I had to think of a quick replacement for the French.